For those who are familiar with podcasts, they'll know that the format is a lot more intimate than the traditional formats, broadcast formats like television and radio. Um, Podcasts started literally back in the day with Apple's iPod, where it was a new feature that they rolled out, and the only way to actually listen to podcasts on the iPod would be to plug your earphones in. And so that initial kind of way of transmission is an indication of the tone of the format, which is a lot more intimate, it's a lot more informal. And so we've been challenging our fellows to kind of engage that way with the stories. Welcome back to another episode of the Caribbean Climate Calabash Podcast. I'm your host, Gladstone Taylor, and today I'll be sharing more with you about the different episodes that you've been seeing so far in season 3, some of the changes that we've made, and what you can look forward to as well for the upcoming season, but also some of the remaining episodes that are left as we try to wrap up season 3. Now, you've been seeing some of these new episodes where you find people or fellows and also experts who are expounding on some of the climate change issues that we've been having around the region. But you're also noticing a change in format of the podcast, where once it would be just an interview with our fellows, the Climate Justice Fellowship Cycle 3. Now you're seeing an intro where there's a 2 to 3 minute video with our fellows kind of engaging with a story that they reported on during their time with the fellowship. Now there are different reasons for that, which we'll get into, but we'll also be talking about the expert episodes that you've been seeing and what you can look forward to. So yeah, let's get into it. The fellow episodes. Now this will also serve as a guide to prospective fellows. It will serve as a guide to current fellows as to what they can expect or what they'll be making for their what I've been calling mini podcasts. Now, for those who are familiar with podcasts, they'll know that the format is a lot more intimate than the traditional formats, broadcast formats like television and radio. Um, Podcasts started literally back in the day with Apple's iPod, where it was a new feature that they rolled out, and the only way to actually listen to podcasts on the iPod would be to plug your earphones in. And so that initial kind of way of transmission is an indication of the tone of the format, which is a lot more intimate, it's a lot more informal. And so we've been challenging our fellows to kind of engage that way with the stories. Now, a quick pro quo to the fellows. Um, we're not asking you to summarize the stories. We're not asking you to retell your stories in a podcast format. This is literally a 2 to 3 minute video. You don't have all that much time. What you're going to be doing is you're going to be picking out points from your story, like any one of the stories that you did during your fellowship, um, whichever one you choose, whichever one is easier or whichever one you find more interesting. It could be multiple as well, because we've had instances where fellows have shared 3 stories, and those 3 stories were related, but they found a way to meld it into their 2 to 3 minute videos. So it could be one, it could be multiple. It's up to you, as long as you can fit it within the format that we have. Speaking directly to our fellows, and the thing to understand again is that you won't be summarizing or retelling, you'll be picking out points. And the interesting thing about storytelling is that that's how it works, right? You have major points in your story. You have the beginning, you have conflicts, and you have the resolution. That's how you have the story arc. And I think the approach to these 2 to 3 minute podcast episodes, what I've been encouraging our fellows um, to do is a similar approach, which is picking out 2 or 3 points. Um, Criteria for these points are: one, they have to be interesting, super interesting, something people may or may not know, um, or the second criteria, it has to be relatable. Now, relatability is very important in pulling the listener in, which this 2 to 3 minute video will serve as the anchor for your podcast. And it's important to think about your the pursuit of podcasts in that way as well. Because just like videos online on YouTube, you don't have a great deal of time. People's attention spans are really short. And so even though the podcast space is a lot more intimate and personal, you still have to grip people. You still have to kind of have that hook in the beginning. And a large part of that is how interesting your points are or how relatable they are. Now, when it comes to interest, that could be anything. That could be like just an interesting fact that people don't know. People always like to learn things, add more information to their memory banks, useful information. So that's a good point, for the criteria of interesting for one of the points. For relatability now, we're talking about things that people go through every day. What's something that's happening in your story that people can relate to? Something that people go through every day. The heat is a big one that we often hear people complain about. Um, Farmers struggle a lot with things like irrigation because plants, the soil is drying out a lot faster these days. It's holding moisture a lot less. Um, and so you have these things that we all kind of go through. Workers who work outdoors are struggling to find ways to deal with the heat. Fishers who, they fish for a living, they're struggling. They're having to go further um, to kind of see the benefits of their labor because our coastlines are being affected by climate change. So it's different things that we're all kind of experiencing. Our job as the journalists is to find those things and to highlight them. And so in your 2 to 3 minute mini podcasts, what you're finding for the fellow and for the listener, what you're experiencing when you're listening to our fellows is them finding these points, whether it be an interesting point or a relatable point, and saying, take a look at this. It's a story that I worked on during my fellowship with the Climate Justice Cycle 3 Fellowship. But also at the end, you'll find a call to action where all of our fellows have published these stories on multiple platforms. And so you can kind of check out the full story if there's anything that has interested or your reader for the fellow or your listener. And for our audience who are listening, if there's anything that has interested you, or that you found relatable in what our fellows have shared, then they, at the end, you can hear they encourage you to check out their full stories, and they give you information about where you can do that. And so that's what essentially you've been listening to for the past 10 episodes. And yeah, we thought it'd be interesting rather than come here and announce that we're going to change the format, that we just switch it up and see what what everyone thought. And we've been getting some really good responses, and we appreciate that as we try to upgrade and increase not just the quality of the podcast but the production value, and also challenge our fellows, because we don't want it to just be the Caribbean Climate Calabash podcast that's in the space, um, sharing climate news and breaking down climate change in our region. We want to have more personable journalists on individual levels that you guys can follow and check out what they have going on. So that's really the intention behind these new episodes that you've been watching. And yeah, I guess to kind of share or to kind of explain more, or give more examples of what you'll be seeing, of what you've been seeing, but to our fellows of what they can kind of expect. Um, I'm going to encourage you guys to obviously check out our YouTube backlist of episodes, the podcast playlist, Caribbean Climate Calabash Podcast on the Climate Tracker YouTube, but also we're available on um, Spotify and Apple Podcasts. So you can check out our backlog of episodes to kind of see what we're talking about. But just to kind of give you guys, uh, all right. So what we're gonna do here is we're gonna head over to YouTube. And for those who are only listening, what I'm doing right now is typing into the search bar Caribbean Climate Calabash Podcast. Literally, if you type that in anywhere, only thing that's gonna pop up is what we got going on. All right. So on YouTube, you're gonna see playlists for the podcast pop up. You click on that.
It's a story that I told that
What
connected
pops
with
up is our first episode with Ryan and Carlos and Jervon and Swain from the COP29 um, fellowship. But what we're looking at right now for in terms of a guide for our fellows is our first episode, which will be key and interesting, right? Because there's a spectrum of production that you can think about when you're thinking about making your 2 to 3 minute video, which is you have the higher end of video production with this
When I
episode.
was a child in St. Lucia, I spent countless hours mesmerized by the ocean's mysteries, dreaming of one day becoming a marine biologist. My college years were dedicated to studying environmental sciences, a path I
Right. And
thought would lead me to directly protect our marine ecosystems. But life, as it often does, had other plans, and I discovered a new passion: the power of storytelling in journalism. 5 years ago, I made a shift.
right. So this is Jacques Wooding from from this season, um, which our Cycle 3 Caribbean Climate Justice Fellowship. And she was a part of that. Now we're up where we've entered the cycle 4. Um, but yeah, this is a really great example of the higher end of video production when it comes to your 2 to 3 minute video. Right now, if this is allowed, meaning if you do have the skills, then you can apply those skills. It is encouraged. We This is meant to be a challenge, so we want to challenge you as well. Even though it's just 2 to 3 minutes, right? So if you can, if you do have the skills and you can produce something like this, that's great. And Jaka does really well in this in her 2 to 3 minutes. She has really nice clips of what's going on, and she does. It's a really great story in general, and that's also a part of why it's up there in terms of the quality of quality spectrum as well of these 2 to 3 minute videos for our fellows. But in the event that you can't or you're not able to, you don't have these kinds of production skills and you don't have the time to learn, or if there's no, literally, if your deadline is too close, then, there's always this from Vanessa, this episode
Hello,
9.
my name is Vanessa Clark, a climate tracker fellow hailing from Nassau, the Bahamas, and I'm here to share a bit on my 3-part series on Hurricane Dorian's indelible mark, 5 years after the storm. I was pretty nervous going into this series. My mentor and I felt like it was the obvious choice to tackle.
Right. So what you're having here now is basically her sharing. It's basically her kind of sharing her experience, but what's happening is that it's a voiceover, right? So she has a few clips. She also has some images that she took while she was reporting um, of some of the people involved. And this her 2 to 3 minute video is essentially a montage of clips and images with a voiceover from her. So she hasn't gone in front of the camera. She hasn't done the post production work of putting up the clips and stuff as well as Jaka did. But one of the really important things to note about this video is that it is still really high quality because of the storytelling. And that's the most important element of your podcast or of your 2 to 3 minute video. The storytelling is the most important thing. So if you aren't able to produce something that's like super high end, I encourage you to put a lot of effort and time into picking out your points, your most interesting points, and how you would frame it, in a informal tone. And also share some things, I guess, something that might be interesting, something people might not know about, or this is and or share something that people may or may not know about the reporting process or your reporting process. So, yeah, you have some pretty solid examples here in terms of the spectrum of what you could do. Um, there's obviously in between stuff, but you kind of get the gist there. So yeah, I'm available. You guys know if you're a part of the fellowship, you have my email. You also have my phone number, so you can contact me if you need anything. If there's anything you need me to clarify, if there's anything you need help with. If I'm not available, there also are other staff members, mentors, program director, that kind of thing. So, reach out if you're having a hard time. Reach out to me in particular for this. But yeah, that's it for in terms of our fellow guide. Um, the next thing that we'll be looking at is our the updates on our expert episodes, which our our second episode was actually Professor.
What we know climate change is doing is changing, is making how these cold fronts manifest themselves or the nature of our event, changing it and making them a little bit more unpredictable. In this case, we knew we were getting the cold front. We could see that how it played out and the
Right. So that's Professor Michael Taylor, who is the Dean and lecturer at the Science and Tech Faculty at the University of the West Indies, Mona. Wow, that's a mouthful. But he was gracious enough to sit down with us for this episode and share his expertise. We talked a lot about the science supporting us to deal with climate change in terms of adaptation, building resilience, but also in terms of how it helps us to posit our cases as vulnerable regions in huge conferences like the COP conferences, where we're negotiating for climate finance funds. So this was a really interesting episode. We had another one there that was also very interesting. We also had another guide episode from our journalism mentor Hippolito, where he shared some of what you can kind of expect.
Hi, I'm Carolina Pizarro.
No, that's not it. That's not it. Yeah, he shared some of what you can expect.
I just have high school. So to anybody who would listen to this, that you need a master's or you need a doctorate, yes, you could go ahead and do that. It helps. I just have high school. I'm getting my associates right now. But don't let just having a high school or a sixth form diploma or anything stop you from whatever you want to be, right? Because right now, I started the digital department here at Channel 5, which is the largest, more established news.
Right, so that's Hippolito Novello, our journalism mentor. He shared a bit with us on that episode about, his journey in journalism, and I think that's particularly important for our fellows to kind of hear. That's a great guide. He shared also things that you can, best practices for when you become a part of the fellowship, things that you can kind of look forward to, do's and don'ts, and just general inspiration, and great mentor advice. So you can check out that episode, you guys, to get some of those awesome gems from Hippolito. This episode is obviously my guide episode. This episode is obviously my guide episode where sharing more about what's going on, but also what you can expect from your fellow episode, from your fellow podcast video. And there will be one more guide episode with your program director where he'll share more about the different opportunities and that kind of thing, and the programs, what you can expect. And that will be Johannes. That will be our next episode. And then we'll have one more episode to wrap up our season 3 before we enter into our 4th season. So yeah, you can look out for that. The final wrap up episode will be a group episode with all of us. We'll kind of be looking back at the year, our favorite moments, our best moments, maybe some of our worst moments, and just recapping what we've accomplished so far. So look out for that episode, for those 2 episodes to wrap up season 3, and yeah, season 4 we might have some new things for you, but just expect better quality, more development with production, and more news. You can drop in the comments as well things that you want us to cover, things that you'd be interested in hearing, either our fellows, experts, or anyone else on board Climate Tracker kind of discussing. And yeah, we have the platform. We have no problem bringing people on to talk about even just one particular thing, if it's what you guys are interested in. So yeah, I want to thank you guys so far I want to thank you guys for the support so far for season 3. And thank you for just keeping up with the podcast, Caribbean Climate Calabash Podcast. And we hope you stick with us. We want to encourage you to keep supporting, please, to keep sharing, liking, commenting. It really helps us a lot to keep platforming some of these episodes, but also in general for our organization, it helps us to help journalists around the region and keep these important programs going so that we can boost the narrative around climate change in our region. And so yeah, that's been me. It's been great catching up with you guys. I'm not gonna stay too long. If there's anything that you feel I missed, you can drop it in the comments below, and I might talk about it in next season's editor episode. But yeah, in the meantime, again, like, share, subscribe. Please continue to support the podcast, whichever platform is your favorite. And yeah, until the next episode, take care.